Commander Vexthal of the Catherian Empire shifted his massive frame in the reinforced chair, the metal groaning under his weight. His exoskeleton, once gleaming black like polished obsidian, now bore the scars of countless battles, plasma burns that had never fully healed, deep gouges from human blade weapons, and the telltale discoloration that came from prolonged exposure to the vacuum of space. The orbital cantina around them pulsed with life. Slithering Vorthan merchants argued over shipping routes while their tentacles gestured wildly. A group of crystalline Zephyrians chimed in harmony near the viewport, their song reflecting off the station's hull. Gas-breathing Nethans floated, in their containment suits, trading exotic spores with anyone willing to pay their price. The air recyclers worked overtime to accommodate the dozen different atmospheric requirements, creating a symphony of mechanical hums and chemical filters. But at Table 7, tucked away in the cantina's darkest corner, silence had fallen like a shroud. 3 young Catherian soldiers sat transfixed, their compound eyes reflecting the swirling nebula visible through the massive viewport. Their carapaces still gleamed with the polish of parade ground inspections, unmarked by the reality of war. Fresh from the military academies, they wore their rank insignia with pride and their weapons with confidence they had never needed to test. Lieutenant Kalmos was the first to break the silence. His mandibles clicked nervously as he leaned forward, his voice carrying the eager tremor of youth. "Commander, please. The stories we hear in the barracks. Some say you commanded the 3rd Assault Fleet during the first wave. Others claim you were there when the humans made their desperate last stand at Terra Station." Vexthal's forearms moved slowly, almost mechanically, as he reached for the bottle of fermented algae extract. The liquid glowed faintly green in the dim lighting, casting eerie shadows across his battle-scarred face. His drinking cavity, a specialized organ that could process the toxic alcohol that would kill most species, accepted the liquid with a soft gurgling sound. "Stories," he muttered, the word carrying more weight than a neutron star. "Is that what they're calling it now?" Sergeant Nixara, barely past her second molting, practically vibrated with excitement. Her youth made her bold where wisdom would have counseled silence. "The instructors say it was the Empire's greatest victory, how we brought the human expansion to its knees, how we showed them that the galaxy belonged to superior species." The bottle slipped slightly in Vexthal's primary hand, and for a moment, the other patrons might have mistaken it for the casual clumsiness of age. But his companions saw the truth, the involuntary tremor that spoke of memories too terrible to fully suppress. "Greatest victory," he repeated, his voice hollow as the void between stars. "Is that what they're teaching in the academies now?" Corporal Dekmar, the youngest of the 3, had remained silent until now. His voice cracked slightly as he spoke, revealing his nervousness. "Commander, sir, we've heard fragments." Whispers. "Some of the older soldiers, they stop talking when we approach. They look at us like we're marching to our own execution." Vexthal's compound eyes swiveled to focus on the young corporal. Each eye held depths that seemed to contain entire solar systems of pain. Smart soldiers, those ones. They know what we learned too late. The cantina's ambient noise seemed to fade around their table, as if the very air was holding its breath. A Vorthan merchant's tentacle brushed against Vexthal's shoulder as it passed, and the old commander's entire body went rigid, his hand instinctively moving toward the plasma pistol at his side. It took him several seconds to recognize the harmless contact, and when he did, his mandibles clicked in what might have been embarrassment. "You want to know about the human war?" he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of star systems. "You want tales of glory and conquest? How the mighty Catherian Empire brought order to the galaxy's newest children?" He drained his glass. In one long pull, the alcohol burning through his system like liquid fire. "But that's not what happened, younglings. That's not what happened at all." Lieutenant Kalmos leaned closer, his eagerness overriding his caution. "Then tell us the truth, Commander. What really happened out there?" Vexthal was quiet for so long that the young soldiers began to wonder if he had forgotten their presence. His forearms moved restlessly, tracing patterns in the condensation on the table's surface star charts. Battle formations, trajectories of ships that would never fly again. The truth, he said finally, is that we didn't crush the humans. We didn't bring them to their knees or show them their place in the galaxy's hierarchy. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing the others to strain to hear him. Over the cantina's ambient noise, they crushed us. They broke us so completely that we begged for peace. And the humans you'll face now, if you're unlucky enough to encounter them. He paused, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm that spoke of barely controlled terror. We learned from that war. Every mistake we made, every tactic we used, every weakness we revealed, they studied it all. They turned our own strategies against us and made them deadlier than we ever imagined possible. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant hum of the station's life support systems and the soft chiming of the Zephyrian song. But even those sounds seemed muted, as if the universe itself was listening to the old commander's words. Their names, Vexel continued, his voice growing even quieter, still echo in my dreams. Lieutenant Dongmin, who held Firebase Zeta. For 6 days with a shattered spine and internal bleeding that should have killed him in hours. Captain Hyjin, who piloted her crippled dreadnought straight into our flagship's reactor core. Sergeant Biorum, who single-handedly held off an entire boarding party with nothing but a plasma rifle and what humans call sheer stubbornness. His voice trailed off, lost in memories that refused to fade, while 3 young soldiers sat in stunned silence, beginning to understand that the galaxy was far more dangerous than their training had prepared them for. Vextel's 4 arms began to shake as he poured another drink, the bottle clinking against his glass like broken promises. The fermented algae glowed brighter in the cantina's dim light, casting green shadows across his scarred face. Around them, the usual chatter of alien species continued, but their table remained trapped in its own bubble of terrible silence. The intelligence reports. He began again, his voice carrying the hollow ring of old wounds. Painted humans as nothing more than clever animals. Our xenobiologists studied their transmissions, their primitive broadcast signals filled with entertainment and meaningless chatter. They concluded that humans were emotional creatures driven by fear and basic survival instincts. Lieutenant Calmo shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The young officer's compound eyes reflected the swirling nebula outside the viewport, but his attention was completely focused on his commander's words. Sir, the Academy taught us that emotional species are predictable, easy to break. A sound escaped from Vexel's throat that might have been laughter, if laughter could carry the weight of 1,000 nightmares. Predictable. Yes, that's what we thought too. He took a long drink, the alcohol burning through his system like plasma fire. Command Intelligence classified humans as Level 3 civilization, barely spacefaring. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles, actual metal slugs propelled by chemical explosions, crude, primitive, laughable. Sergeant Nixara leaned forward. Eagerly, her young face still held the confidence that came from never having faced real combat. But surely their technology was no match for our plasma cannons and energy shields. That's what made it so perfect, Vexel continued, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm that spoke of barely contained terror. Kepler Station orbited their outer colonies, a mining facility with maybe 200 human workers. Dar. Battle planners. Called it a training exercise for new recruits. 5,000 Catherian warriors against 200 miners and a handful of security guards. The old commander's 4 hands moved restlessly across the table's surface, tracing invisible star maps and battle formations. I remember standing on the bridge of the dreadnought, crushing Talon, watching Kepler Station grow larger on our screens. It looked so small, so fragile, like we could crack it open with our bare claws. Corporal Vekmar's voice was barely above a whisper. What went wrong, sir? Wrong? Vextel's compound eyes swiveled to focus on the young soldier. Nothing went wrong with our plan. Everything went wrong with our understanding of what humans actually are. He paused, his drinking cavity making soft gurgling sounds as he processed. More alcohol. We opened communications with the station, demanded their surrender. Standard procedure. Most species see our ships and immediately start negotiating terms. The cantina around them seemed to grow quieter, as if other patrons could sense the darkness of the tale being told. A group of crystalline Zephyrians near the viewport had stopped their harmonic singing, their translucent forms reflecting the commander's words like mirrors of sound. Station Commander Park answered our transmission, Vexel continued, his voice growing more distant with each word. Human, female, maybe 40 standard years old. She looked at our fleet of 12 warships and said, "Unknown vessels, you are not authorized in this system. Please state your business or prepare to be fired upon." His mandibles clicked rapidly. Fired upon. By a mining station with maybe 6 defensive turrets against our entire battle group. Lieutenant Kalmos couldn't hide his confusion. Surely. She was bluffing? Trying to buy time for reinforcements? "That's what we thought too," Vexel replied, his forearms gesturing helplessly. "We ran deep scans. No hidden weapons. No cloaked ships. No reinforcements within 3 light years. Just 200 humans in a metal can, threatening to fight 5,000 of the galaxy's finest warriors." The old commander's voice began to crack like breaking ice. I gave the order to begin the assault. Our dropships launched with precision. Timing, our plasma cannons charged to minimum power. We wanted prisoners for interrogation, after all. The first wave was supposed to disable their communications and weapon systems. Clean, professional, efficient. He took another long drink, his hands shaking more noticeably now. The dropships made it exactly 18 seconds before the humans opened fire. As primitive kinetic weapons, they had modified them. Somehow, these miners had turned their industrial equipment into weapons that could punch through our assault craft armor like paper. Sergeant Nixara's enthusiasm was beginning to fade, replaced by growing unease. But our soldiers must have adapted quickly. The first human I personally encountered was Private Jin Woo. Vexel continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Young male, maybe 20 standard years. I caught him in a maintenance corridor, alone, cut off from his unit. My plasma rifle was charged and ready. I had him dead to rights. The silence at their table grew heavy as neutronium. The old commander stared into his drink as if it contained answers to questions he was afraid to ask. I fired a full power bolt directly into his chest. The plasma burned through his crude armor like it was nothing. I watched the energy tear through his organs, his rib cage, his spine. Any civilized being would have fallen instantly, dead before they hit the ground. Ophextal-esque compound eyes began to leak a clear fluid, the Catherian equivalent of tears. This human looked down at the hole in his chest, looked back at me, and said something in their language. Later I learned it translated to, "Is that all you've got?" Then he raised his projectile weapon and kept firing. Lieutenant Kelmos's voice cracked slightly. "That's impossible, sir. No organic being can survive that kind of trauma." "Possible," Vexel repeated, nodding slowly. That became our most used word during the human war. Jinwoo kept firing until his ammunition was gone. Then he drew a metal blade, an actual sharpened piece of steel, and charged my position. A dying human with a knife against a fully armed Catherian warrior in combat armor. The old commander's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme distress. He moved like nothing I'd ever seen, not the clumsy stumbling of a mortally wounded creature, but with purpose and coordination that shouldn't have been possible. The blade found gaps in my armor that our own engineers claimed didn't exist. Corporal Vekmar's voice was barely audible. Did you kill him?" Eventually Vexel replied, his forearms wrapping around himself as if seeking protection. "From his own memories, but not before he carved patterns in my carapace that the medical technicians said should have killed me 3 times over. And as he died, he was still trying to activate a grenade, still fighting, still trying to take me with him." The cantina's ambient noise seemed muted, as if the very air was reluctant to carry such terrible truths. Even the Vorthan merchants had grown quiet, their tentacles moving in slow, hypnotic patterns that spoke of shared unease. "That was just the beginning," Vexel continued, his voice growing stronger with the telling, as if sharing the burden made it easier to bear. "Major Eugen was in command of the station's main reactor facility, so our infiltration team hit it with a concentrated plasma bombardment that should have vaporized everything within 50 meters. He paused, his drinking cavity making soft gurgling sounds as he processed more alcohol. The explosion threw her nearly 100 meters through the facility's corridors. Shrapnel from the blast should have killed her instantly. Pieces of metal the size of my claws buried in her organs. Her left arm completely severed, internal bleeding that painted the walls with her life. The young soldiers sat transfixed, their compound eyes reflecting horror they were only beginning to understand. Any rational being would have used their last moments to call for help, to send a surrender message, to beg for medical aid. Vexel continued. Eugène used her remaining arm to drag herself 300 meters through the station's maintenance tunnels. She left a trail of blood that our tracking specialists followed for hours afterward, trying to understand how any creature could lose that much fluid and still function. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more impact than shouting. She reached the station's self-destruct console and activated a overload sequence that our technical experts later said was impossible with the damage to the systems. The explosion took out our entire assault battalion and crippled 2 of our support ships. Lieutenant Calmos's voice carried a tremor that spoke of dawning understanding. Sir, how many humans died in that first engagement? Vexel was quiet for a long moment, his compound eyes reflecting the swirling nebula outside the viewport. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of star systems. All of them. Every single human on Kepler Station died fighting. But they took 4,000 Catherian warriors with them. He raised his glass in a gesture that might have been a toast or a prayer. That's when we learned the first rule of human warfare. They don't understand the concept of acceptable losses. To them, every loss is unacceptable and they will burn down the galaxy before they let you take what's theirs without paying a price that makes victory taste like defeat. The fermented algae in Vexel's glass had stopped glowing, its bioluminescent properties fading like dying stars.
Ow.
His forearms trembled as he set the container down, the sound echoing through their corner of the cantina like a death knell. Around them, the usual chaos of interstellar commerce continued, Vorthan traders haggling over spice routes, crystalline Zephyrians harmonizing in frequencies that made the metal walls vibrate, and gas-breathing Nethans floating in their containment, suits like jellyfish in an alien ocean. But at Table 7, time seemed frozen in amber, suspended between horror and fascination. You have to understand, Vexel began, his compound eyes reflecting the swirling nebula outside the massive viewport. What made humans truly terrifying wasn't their willingness to die. Every species has warriors willing to sacrifice themselves for their cause. What made them nightmares was their ability to learn from death itself. Sergeant Nixara's carapace had lost its polished sheen, dulled by the growing weight of the commander's words. Sir, surely you mean they learned proper military tactics? How to follow orders and maintain discipline under fire? The sound that escaped from Vexel's throat was like grinding metal, a laugh that had forgotten how to carry joy. Discipline. Orders, child. You still don't understand what we faced out there. He reached for the bottle again, his primary hand shaking so badly that alcohol splashed across the table's surface, creating small pools that reflected the cantina's colored lighting like tiny alien worlds. After Kepler Station, our command structure was in chaos. 4,000 dead warriors, 2 crippled ships, and a mining facility that had fought like a military fortress. High Command ordered a full investigation. They needed to understand how 200 human miners had inflicted such devastating casualties on the Empire's finest assault troops. Lieutenant Calmos leaned forward, his young face a mixture of fascination and growing dread. What did the investigation find, sir? That's when we discovered the first terrifying truth about human warfare. Vexel continued, his voice growing more distant with each word. Every engagement we'd had with them, they were recording. Not just military communications or tactical. Data, everything. The frequency signatures of our plasma weapons, the molecular composition of our armor, the energy output of our ship reactors, even the biological stress patterns in our voices when we gave orders under pressure. The old commander's mandibles clicked in a rapid staccato pattern, like ancient prayer beads rattling in a monk's trembling hands. Within 3 months of Kepler, human forces launched their first major counteroffensive. We thought it would be a desperate attempt to retake lost territory. Standard refugee evacuation while they pleaded for galactic intervention. Corporal Vekmar's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. But that's not what happened, was it, sir? The target was Proxima. Mining colony, an asteroid facility we'd captured 6 weeks earlier. The asteroid itself was huge, maybe 50 kilometers across, honeycombed with mining tunnels and processing chambers. We'd installed a full garrison there. 2,000 elite troops with orbital support from the battlecruiser Endless Victory. Vexel paused, his forearms moving in restless patterns across the table's surface, as if trying to map star charts from memory.
Around them.
The cantina's atmosphere recyclers hummed with mechanical precision, but the sound seemed hollow, like breathing. In a tomb, Commander Teahan led their assault force. Human female, maybe 35 standard years old. Our intelligence analysts had studied her service record. She'd been a mining engineer before the war started. No formal military training, no combat experience. By all rational calculations, she should have been organizing evacuation convoys, not leading military operations. The young soldiers exchanged glances, their compound eyes reflecting the growing understanding that everything they'd been taught about warfare was about to be shattered like glass under a plasma cannon. The human fleet approached the asteroid, using standard defensive formations. Nothing innovative or unexpected. Our sensors detected maybe 30 ships, converted civilian vessels mostly. Cargo haulers and passenger transports with crude armor welded to their hulls. Against our battlecruiser and 2 escort destroyers, it should have been a slaughter. Vexel's drinking cavity made soft gurgling sounds as he processed more alcohol, the chemical burn seeming to give him strength to continue his tale. That's when we learned how humans had been spending those 3 months since Kepler. Captain Minho's engineering team had done more than just study our plasma technology. They'd improved it. Sergeant Nixar's voice was barely above a whisper. Proved. At how, sir? We used plasma for precise surgical strikes? Clean energy beams that could punch through armor or disable specific ship systems without unnecessary collateral damage. Civilized warfare, following the conventions that every spacefaring species had agreed upon for thousands of years. Dun 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 dun. Old Commander's compound eyes seemed to focus on something far beyond the cantina's walls. Beyond the station itself, beyond the present moment entirely. The humans took our plasma technology and turned it into something obscene. Instead of focused beams, they created plasma explosives. Bombs that could burn at temperatures hot enough to melt through asteroid rock like it was ice. They'd converted our surgical instruments into weapons of mass destruction. Lieutenant Kalmos shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the metal creaking. Under his weight, surely our garrison detected the modifications. Our sensors would have identified the threat. Our sensors detected exactly what the humans wanted them to detect, Vexthal replied, his voice carrying the bitter weight of hard-learned lessons. While Commander Tehain's fleet engaged our orbital forces in what appeared to be a desperate frontal assault, Captain Minho and his engineering team were already inside the asteroid. The cantina around them seemed to grow quieter, as if the very air was reluctant to carry such terrible truths. Even the Vorthon merchants had stopped. Their negotiations, their tentacles moving in slow, hypnotic patterns that spoke of shared unease. They'd infiltrated through the old mining tunnels, passages that our occupation forces had sealed off as unnecessary security risks. But humans don't think like civilized species. Where we saw abandoned infrastructure, they saw opportunity. Vexthal's 4 hands began to shake more violently, forcing him to grip the table's edge for stability. Every corridor, every junction, every maintenance shaft, they'd rigged them all with improvised plasma charges. It's not random explosions, but carefully calculated destruction designed to channel our forces into kill zones. Specialist Yoon-kyung had studied the asteroid's geological structure for weeks, mapping every stress fracture and weak point. Corporal Vekmar's voice was barely audible above the cantina's ambient noise. How many of our people were in the facility, sir? 2,000 troops in the main garrison, plus another 500 technical specialists and support staff. Vexel replied, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm that spoke of barely contained anguish. The human assault force numbered, maybe, 200 soldiers. By every military doctrine in the galaxy, it should have been suicide. The old commander reached for his glass again, but his hands were shaking too badly to lift it without spilling. Lieutenant Calmos quietly pushed the container closer, his young face pale with growing understanding of the horror that was coming. The surface battle lasted 6 hours. Standard fleet engagement, with our superior firepower slowly grinding down their converted civilian ships. Commander Tehayan was good, better than our analysts had predicted. But physics is physics, mass and energy don't lie, and we had both in overwhelming quantities. Vextel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing the others to lean forward to catch his words. And while we were winning the space battle, Captain Minho was losing the war inside the asteroid. Our garrison commander reported successful defensive actions. Minimal casualties. Human infiltrators contained and neutralized, everything proceeding according to established protocols. The silence that followed stretched like a taut cable, ready to snap under the weight of unspoken horrors. Around them, the normal sounds of the cantina, conversations in a dozen alien languages. The clink of glasses and trading implements, the soft hum of life support systems, seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then Specialist Yongkyun activated her final surprise. Vextel continued, his compound eyes leaking the clear fluid that served as Catharian tears. She'd calculated the exact stress points needed to fracture the asteroid's core structure. Not random destruction, but surgical precision applied to geological engineering. When she detonated her charges, the entire 50-kilometer rock split in half like a cracked egg. The young soldiers sat in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process the implications of what they were hearing. Sergeant Nixara was the first to find her voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. The garrison, ... gone. Vexel replied simply. 2,500 Catharian warriors and specialists, plus our battle cruiser, endless victory in both. Escort destroyers. The asteroid fragments moved fast enough to punch through our shields like they were made of soap bubbles. He finally managed to lift his glass, draining the remaining alcohol in one long pull. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the message Commander Tehayan broadcast on all military frequencies as the debris field spread across the system. She called it acceptable casualties and immediately began coordinating their next operation. Lieutenant Calmos' voice cracked, like breaking ice. Next operation? 17,000 Catharian dead in a single engagement. And the humans treated it like a successful training exercise. Vexil concluded, his forearms wrapping around himself as if seeking protection from his own memories. They'd learned to turn our own weapons against us, studied our tactics until they could predict our responses better than we could ourselves, and somehow always found ways to make victory cost more than defeat. The old commander looked up at his young audience, his compound eyes reflecting depths of experience they were only beginning to fathom. That's when we realized we weren't fighting a war anymore. We were attending a very expensive education, and the humans were teaching us lessons we'd never forget. The orbital cantina's lights dimmed automatically as the station's day cycle shifted, casting longer shadows across the assembled alien species. Vextel's scarred carapace seemed to absorb the darkness, making him appear more like a living shadow than a decorated military commander. His forearms moved restlessly across the table's surface, tracing invisible patterns that only he could see, star charts of battles that had carved themselves into his memory like acid etching metal. 18 months, he whispered, his compound eyes reflecting the distant stars visible through the massive viewport. 18 months of what we called the Great Pacification. 18 months of believing we were slowly crushing human resistance across 12 star systems. The bottle of fermented algae sat empty between them, its bioluminescent glow completely faded. Vextel stared at it as if it contained answers to questions he was afraid to ask. Round their table, the usual chaos of interstellar commerce had quieted to respectful whispers. Even species that had never encountered humans seemed to sense the weight of the tale being told. High Command was pleased with our progress, he continued, his mandibles clicking in what might have been bitter laughter. Regular reports of successful engagements, captured territory, disrupted supply lines. On the strategic displays, it looked like we were winning. The red markers of human resistance were shrinking, being replaced by the green symbols of Catherian control. Sergeant Nixara shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her polished carapace reflecting the cantina's dim lighting. "But you weren't actually winning, were you, sir?" "We were being herded," Vexel replied, his voice carrying the hollow ring of a man who had seen too much. Like prey animals being driven toward a killing ground. Every victory was exactly where the humans wanted us to be. Every captured system drew us deeper into their web. We thought we were the hunters, but we were just following a trail of breadcrumbs left by apex predators. The old commander's drinking cavity made soft gurgling sounds as he processed the last traces of alcohol in his system. The chemical burn seemed to give him strength to continue, as if pain was the only thing that could cut through the numbness of memory. Admiral Sung-ho revealed herself during the third battle of Kepler's Edge. We'd been tracking what appeared to be a refugee convoy, maybe 50 converted civilian ships trying to evacuate colonists from the Outer Rim. Standard pursuit protocol. Corner them. Demand surrender. Process the prisoners according to galactic conventions. Lieutenant Kalmos leaned forward, his young face a mixture of fascination and growing dread. "But it wasn't a refugee convoy?" "Oh, it was," Vexel said, his compound eyes focusing on something far beyond the cantina's walls. 50 ships full of human civilians. Families with children, elderly colonists, workers who'd never held a weapon in their lives. But that's what made it so terrifying. They weren't running away from us. They were running toward something. Cantina's atmosphere recyclers hummed with mechanical precision. But the sound seemed muted, as if the very air was reluctant to carry such terrible truths. A group of crystalline Zephyrians near the viewport had stopped their harmonic singing, their translucent forms reflecting the commander's words like mirrors of sound. The convoy was bait, Vexel continued, his forearms beginning to shake with the effort of remembering. Admiral Sung-ho had gambled everything on a single assumption that we would pursue according to standard military doctrine, that we would see helpless civilians and move to capture them intact. Corporal Vekmar's voice was barely audible. Above the cantina's ambient noise, "What happened when you intercepted them, sir?" "We followed protocol," the old commander replied, his mandibles clicking rapidly in a pattern that spoke of barely contained terror. Battle cruiser dominating fist, to escort destroyers and a full complement of assault craft. Overwhelming force designed to cow any resistance before it could begin. Admiral Krelinoth himself commanded the operation. Vexel paused, his compound eyes leaking the clear fluid that served as Catherian tears. The refugee ships didn't try to run. They didn't attempt to fight. They just ... stopped. 50 vessels hanging in space like they were waiting for something. Admiral Krelinoth hailed them, demanded their surrender, threatened to open fire if they didn't comply immediately. The silence that followed stretched like a taut cable, ready to snap under the weight of unspoken horrors. Around them, the normal sounds of the cantina seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "That's when Captain Jisoo revealed herself," Vexel whispered, his voice so quiet that the others had to strain to hear him. "Her destroyer indomitable spirit decloaked directly beneath our flagship, close enough that our point defense systems couldn't target her without hitting our own hull. She'd been hiding in the convoy's sensor shadow, waiting for us to get close enough." Lieutenant Kalmos' voice cracked like breaking ice. "One destroyer against a battlecruiser? That's suicide." "That's what we thought too," Vexel replied, his forearms wrapping around himself as if seeking protection from his own memories. But Jisoo wasn't trying to win a space battle. She was trying to save her people. The moment she opened fire, every civilian ship in the convoy began emergency acceleration toward the jump point. The old commander's drinking cavity made dry clicking sounds, as if his body had forgotten how to process liquid. Our return fire crippled her ship within minutes. Reactor damage, hull breaches, life support failing. Any rational commander would have ordered evacuation, tried to save their crew. Instead, Jisoo ordered her people to prepare for ramming speed. Sergeant Nixara's enthusiasm had completely vanished, replaced by a growing horror she was only beginning to understand. "Sir, you said her crew should have evacuated?" "They refused." Vextel cut her off, his voice rising to almost a shout before dropping back to a whisper. "Every single human on that ship voted to stay. They could have taken escape pods, could have surrendered, could have begged for mercy. Instead, they rigged their reactor to overload and turned their crippled destroyer into a guided missile." The cantina around them had fallen completely silent now, as if every alien species present could sense the weight of the tale being told. Even the Vorthan merchants had stopped their negotiations, their tentacles moving in slow, hypnotic patterns that spoke of shared unease. "The indomitable spirit hit our flagship's engine section at nearly half the speed of light," Vextel continued, his compound eyes reflecting the explosion as if it were happening again right in front of him. "The reactor overload punched through our shields like they were made of paper. Admiral Kreleneth and 3,000 of the Empire's finest warriors died in that impact." Lieutenant Kalmos' voice was barely a whisper, but that was the end of it. "Surely? The destroyer was destroyed? The convoy escaped?" That was when Major Hyanwu revealed the true depths of human madness. Vexel replied, his mandibles clicking in rapid staccato patterns. Somehow, impossibly, a human boarding party had survived the explosion. Not just survived, they'd used the chaos of the impact to breach our hull and were fighting their way through our ship's corridors like demons from the void. The old commander's forehands began to shake so violently that he had to grip the table's edge for stability. I was leading a damage control team to the engine section when we encountered them. 12 humans in environment suits moving through our corridors like they owned them. They knew our ship's layout better than we did. They knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. Corporal Dekmar's voice cracked with growing fear. "How could they know your ship's internal structure?" "Because they'd been studying us for months," Vextel answered, his voice carrying the bitter weight of hard-learned lessons. Every engagement, every captured vessel, every prisoner exchange, they'd been gathering intelligence. They knew the weak points in our armor, the vulnerable systems in our ships, the psychological pressure points that would break our morale. The cantina's lights flickered momentarily, as if the station's power grid was responding to the emotional weight of the conversation. In that brief moment of darkness, Vexel's scarred carapace seemed to glow with its own inner light, like a star that had burned too bright and was slowly dying. I watched Sergeant Minkyong cut through a squad of our elite warriors with nothing but a vibroblade and what she called righteous anger, he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She moved like nothing I'd ever seen, not the desperate flailing of a cornered animal, but with purpose and coordination that shouldn't have been possible in zero gravity. The old commander's compound eyes focused on each of the young soldiers, in turn making sure they understood the full implications of what he was telling them. But the most terrifying part wasn't her skill with that blade. It was what she said as she fought. She kept repeating the same phrase over and over. For Captain Jesu, for the indomitable spirit, for the people who trusted us to bring them home. Sergeant Nixara's voice was barely audible. She was avenging her captain. She was honoring her, Vextel corrected, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm that spoke of profound respect mixed with absolute terror. To humans, their ships aren't just machines. Their commanders aren't just superior officers. They're family. And when you threaten a human's family, don't just make an enemy. You create a force of nature that will hunt you across the galaxy. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant hum of the station's life support systems and the soft whisper of recycled air moving through the ventilation ducts. But even those sounds seemed muted, as if the universe itself was processing the implications of what had been revealed. When Colonel Dalsu's reinforcements arrived 6 hours later, they found the wreckage of our battle cruiser and both escort destroyers, Extal concluded, his forearms gesturing helplessly at the magnitude of the defeat. But instead of celebrating their victory, the first thing they did was broadcast a message across all human military frequencies, not to boast about their success, but to honor Captain Jisu's sacrifice. Lieutenant Kalmos' voice carried a tremor that spoke of dawning understanding. What did the message say, sir? The indomitable spirit and her crew have shown us the way, Vextel quoted, his voice carrying the weight of words that had haunted him for years. Every human ship in the sector heard that transmission. And from that moment forward, they all fought twice as hard, knowing that their sacrifice would be remembered. Their courage would be honored, and their deaths would have meaning. The old commander looked up at his young audience, his compound eyes reflecting depths of experience they were only beginning to fathom. That's when we realized the terrible truth. We weren't just fighting an enemy. We were fighting a species that had turned warfare into a form of worship, where every battle was a prayer and every death was a sacrament. The empty drinking vessel sat between them like a monument to fallen warriors, its metallic surface reflecting the swirling colors of the nebula visible through the cantina's massive viewport. Vexthal's forearms had stopped their restless movement, hanging at his sides like broken machinery. His compound eyes stared into the vessel's depths as if searching for answers in its fractured reflections. Around them, the orbital cantina had returned to its normal rhythm of interstellar commerce, but their corner remained trapped in a bubble of terrible silence. The three young Catherian soldiers sat motionless, their polished carapaces dulled by the weight of revelations that had shattered everything they thought they knew about warfare, about honor, about the nature of the galaxy itself. The third year Vexel began, his voice so quiet it barely registered above the ambient hum of life support systems. By the third year, we weren't even pretending to fight a war anymore. We were just trying to survive long enough to figure out how to surrender without losing what remained of our dignity. Lieutenant Calmos shifted uncomfortably, his young face reflecting the growing understanding that his species had been living a lie for decades. Sir, the official records state that the Catherian Empire achieved a strategic victory and negotiated from a position of strength. The sound that escaped from Vexeles's throat was like metal grinding against stone. A laugh that had forgotten how to carry any emotion except pain. Strategic victory. Position of strength. Is that what they're calling it in the history books? He finally looked up from his empty glass, his compound eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. Let me tell you about our position of strength, youngling. The old commander's mandibles clicked in a slow, deliberate rhythm that spoke of memories too terrible to be rushed. The peace negotiations took place on Harmony Station, a neutral facility in the Vega system. Our delegation included Grand Admiral Kexel, High Commander Zeltar, the three of our most experienced diplomatic strategists. We arrived expecting to dictate terms to a beaten enemy. Sergeant Nixara's voice was barely above a whisper. But that's not what happened, was it, sir? The human delegation consisted of one person, Vexel continued, his forearms beginning to shake with the effort of remembering. General Sujin, human female, maybe 45 standard years old. She walked into that conference room like she owned it, carrying nothing but a simple data pad, and wearing the same expression I'd seen on her face when she ordered the orbital bombardment of Kepler-7. The cantina around them seemed to grow quieter, as if other patrons could sense the weight of the tale being told. Even the crystalline Zephyrians had stopped their harmonic singing, their translucent forms reflecting the commander's words like living prisms of sound and meaning. Grand Admiral Kextel opened the negotiations with our standard diplomatic protocols, Kextel said, his voice growing more distant with each word. Territorial concessions, reparations for damages, restrictions on military development. Usual terms we imposed on defeated enemies. General Sujin listened to our entire presentation without saying a word, just making notes on her datapad. Lieutenant Calmos leaned forward despite himself. What did she say when you finished? She smiled, Vexel replied, his compound eyes reflecting the memory like fragments of a broken mirror. Not the desperate grin of someone trying to hide their fear, but the patient expression of a teacher about to correct a particularly foolish student. Then she said something that made every Catherian in that room question everything we thought we knew about the universe. The silence that followed stretched like a cable under tension, ready to snap under the weight of unspoken horrors. Around them, the normal sounds of the cantina, conversations in a dozen alien languages, the clink of glasses and trading implements, the soft hum of atmospheric processors seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. I said, thank you for the training exercise, but we have other enemies to prepare for. Vexel continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Training exercise. 3 years of war, millions of casualties on both sides, Entire star systems turned into graveyards, and she called it a training exercise. Corporal Vekmar's voice cracked with growing terror. Sir, what did she mean by other enemies? That's when Admiral Jinho joined the conversation, the old commander replied, his mandibles clicking in rapid patterns that spoke of barely contained panic. Human male, younger than Sujin, but with eyes that had seen things that would break most beings. He activated a holographic display that showed ... everything. Vexel's forehands began to tremble so violently that he had to grip the table's edge for stability. Every battle we'd fought, every tactic we'd used, every weapon we'd deployed, they had it all cataloged and analyzed. Ship designs, crew, rotations, psychological profiles of our commanders, even the chemical composition of our armor plating. They knew us better than we knew ourselves. The cantina's lights dimmed automatically as the station's night cycle began, casting longer shadows across the assembled alien species. But their table remained illuminated by the cold glow of Vexel-S memories, as if the very air around them was charged with the electricity of terrible revelations. But that wasn't the worst part, he continued, his voice becoming barely audible. Colonel HAI presented us with their tactical assessment of our military capabilities. Not just what we'd shown them during the war, but everything. Our reserve fleets, our classified weapon projects, our defensive installations that we thought were completely secret. They'd been studying us for decades before the first shot was fired. Sergeant Nixara's enthusiasm had completely vanished, replaced by a growing horror she was only beginning to understand. How could they know about classified installations? Because they'd been watching us, Vexel answered, his compound eyes reflecting the depth of his species' defeat. It's not just military surveillance, but complete intelligence gathering. They knew our culture, our psychology, our weaknesses and strengths. The war hadn't been a conflict between equals. It had been a laboratory experiment, and we were the test subjects. The old commander reached for his glass again, forgetting for a moment that it was empty. His drinking cavity made dry clicking. Sounds as if his body had forgotten how to process the reality of what he was remembering. General Sujin showed us footage from what she called their standard training exercises. He whispered, his voice so quiet that the others had to lean forward to catch his words. Simulated battles against enemies far more dangerous than us. Scenarios involving species we'd never heard of. Weapons that violated every law of physics we understood. Tactical situations that made our worst nightmares look like children's games. Lieutenant Colmo's voice was barely a whisper. Sir, are you saying they were holding back during the war? Holding back? Vextel's laugh was like breaking glass, sharp and painful to hear. Commander Hyansu showed us classified footage of their military exercises. What they used against us, the tactics that nearly destroyed our entire empire, represented maybe 10% of their actual capabilities. 10%. The cantina around them had fallen completely silent now, as if every alien species present could sense the magnitude of what was being revealed. Even the Vorthan merchants had stopped their negotiations, their tentacles moving in slow, hypnotic patterns that spoke of shared unease. The peace treaty they offered us was more generous than anything we could have hoped for. Vextel continued, his forearms wrapping around himself as if seeking protection from his own memories. Full territorial sovereignty, reparations for damages, even military assistance if we were attacked by other species. It was everything we could have asked for and more. Corporal Vekmar's voice cracked with growing understanding. But it wasn't generosity, was it, sir? It was dismissal, the old commander replied, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm that spoke of profound humiliation mixed with desperate relief. They gave us favorable terms not because they respected us as equals, but because we were no longer worth their attention. Like adults giving candy to children to keep them quiet while the grown-ups discussed important matters. The station's atmospheric processors cycled with a soft whoosh, replacing the recycled air with a fresh mixture that carried the sense of a dozen different alien atmospheres. But at their table, the air seemed thick with the weight of revelations. That had changed everything. As we prepared to leave Harmony Station, General Sujin pulled me aside for a private conversation, Vexel said, his voice becoming barely audible. She thanked me for my service and said something that still haunts my dreams. She said, "Your people fought with honor, Commander. You've earned the right to live in peace. But remember, there are things in this galaxy that make our little war look like a disagreement between neighbors. I pray you never encounter them." The old commander slowly pushed himself up from his chair, his joints creaking like old metal under stress. His compound eyes swept across the cantina's diverse collection of alien species, Vorthins with their writhing tentacles, crystalline Zephyrians reflecting the colored lights, gas-breathing Nethans floating in their containment suits like living clouds. "So, here's my advice, younglings," he said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-learned wisdom. "Pray to whatever gods you honor that humanity never sees your species as a genuine threat. Because if they do, you won't be sitting in cantinas sharing war stories with your grandchildren. You'll be particles of dust floating in the void, wondering, what cosmic joke led to your species' extinction?" Vexthal dropped several credit chips on the table, payment for drinks that had helped him forget for a few hours before forcing him to remember everything with crystal clarity. His forearms moved with the careful precision of age and experience, each motion deliberate and measured. "The humans are still out there," he continued, shuffling toward the cantina's exit with the slow gait of someone who had seen too much and lived too long. Still learning, still preparing for whatever threats they believe are coming. And every day, they get a little bit stronger, a little bit smarter, a little bit more dangerous. The three young soldiers sat in stunned silence, their compound eyes reflecting the swirling nebula outside the viewport. Around them, the cantina's normal chaos slowly returned, conversations resuming. Drinks being poured, deals being struck between species that had no idea how close they had come to witnessing the end of everything they knew. Lieutenant Kalmos was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "One last question. If the humans were so powerful, why did they let us survive? Why didn't they just eliminate us as a potential future threat?" Vexthal paused at the cantina's exit, his scarred carapace reflecting the colored lights like a living monument to the horrors of war. When he turned back to look at them, his compound eyes held depths of knowledge that no young soldier should ever have to acquire. "Because younglings," he said, his voice carrying across the cantina like a prayer for the dead, "they're not monsters. They're something far more terrifying, they're teachers. In every species they encounter, every war they fight, every peace they negotiate, it's all part of their education. They're learning how to fight something that hasn't revealed itself, yet something that makes them prepare for wars we can't even imagine." The cantina's airlock hissed shut behind him, leaving three young Catherian soldiers staring into their own reflections in empty glasses, contemplating a universe where the most dangerous species in the galaxy was still holding back, still learning, still preparing for enemies that existed only in their nightmares and in the depths of space. Human ships continued their patrols, their crews running endless training exercises, their computers analyzing data from conflicts that had ended decades ago, all in preparation for a war that might never come or might already be closer than anyone dared to imagine. The end.